Greetings, Mayhemers. So today we're going to kind of talk a little bit about internet culture and how vulnerable are we to other people's bullshit when we're online, reading articles, having conversations, discussions, or debates, or whatever kinds of things we tend to run into pretty often on the internet these days. And I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about being critical, um, especially when evaluating political or scientific information because, quite honestly, 90% of what we get in our social media feeds is very much propagandic in nature. So when you think of like propaganda, you might think of like the war posters in World War I or World War II, or just some of the garbage shit that politicians put up on TV ads to garner votes. I mean, people buy the shit. Obviously, if it didn't work, they wouldn't do it and spend so much money trying to do it. But I know that most of my viewers, and probably most people in general, like to think of themselves as strong, independently minded individuals. And I kind of beg to fucking differ with you. I don't think most of us really are. I'm going to give you kind of some examples about why I believe that and why I believe that people are much more vulnerable on an intellectual level than I think that they want to admit. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to kind of look at a different idea about what propaganda is. So, propaganda is sort of defined as just sort of false or misleading or incomplete information that's meant to sort of sway its consumers into a belief or political affiliation or buying and selling pattern or some other sort of agenda or motive. And I'm going to take a look at one specific example today that I want you guys to think about because we do this all the time. I do it, you do it, or whatever. We see something that resonates us, something that's written some stupid, jerky clickbait fucking title like, oh, this is gonna blow your fucking mind, or, titles that contain empty words like literally, right? Or other dumb shit like that. I mean, the way people write articles on the internet is absolutely absurd. And it makes it hard for us, the consumers, to weed through to find the good information or to figure out what is really trying to be said. And since so much of the internet is just based on like clicks for money or popularity or status, it's sometimes hard to establish a motive for that because with the World War I posters, or World War II posters, or whatever you're thinking about in terms of very obvious propaganda, the motive is clear. It's recruitment, it's persuasion. In the context of internet culture, it's hard to believe that all of these authors actually have a deeply vested interest in anything other than, sort of getting their paycheck or getting their popularity or their status increased or whatever. So, I mean, I get it. It's a grind. I mean, I'm trying to do something similar with my own podcast. Hopefully one day I'll be able to monetize and supplement my own income with what I'm doing here. But that aside, uh, so I'm going to be using a different feature on here today. We'll see if I can transition into it fairly quickly. But let's see here. There's my screen capture. All right, so basically to talk about propaganda, there's these few separate types of propaganda, such as appealing to emotions, glittering generalities, which is usually sort of appealing to sort of giant abstract ideas like morality or religion or patriotism or something like that. All of these things are persuasive tools that are meant to sort of evoke a response from the consumer. Not always a conscious response, but maybe at times. You have the bandwagon fallacy. Basically, everybody else is doing it. Then there's denigrating and name calling, euphemisms. I like the plain folks one. We're the same as you are. Donald Trump sort of pulled this one off on the working class during his last election. Obviously, they're nothing alike, but that's how he got his votes, so good job. Misrepresenting science and using scientific jargon, and I think this is kind of one I'm going to focus on a little bit because being somebody who used to participate in the sciences, it's something I still do is avidly try to consume. scientific information, but in the absence of having that university database at my fingers makes it a little bit harder to weed through the bullshit. You know, when you're on Facebook or whatever, you get websites like Big Think. Okay, so here's one I picked out for today. Are cats jerks, or are you the jerk? A new study from Oregon State University makes it clear. It's you. Well, dang, those snarky old scientists. What are they thinking here? Okay, researchers discovered that the more attention you give a cat, the more likely they are to return it. Cats are territorial. Being in their home environment greatly affects their attitude. The common wisdom that cats are aloof is provably false. Okay, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, aloofness is kind of a subjective term. I'm kind of gonna see how they operationally define that. But so what I want to bring your attention to when you're looking at articles on sites like Big Think or IFL Science or something like that is the title. All right, does that title look even remotely scientific to you? It's not. I mean, that's not how scientists think. That's not how scientists word things. Granted, it's easy to, want to have things in plain language, being a consumer and all, but it's very easily for some things to get really lost in the translation there. So the three claims that it makes here, that researchers discovered the more attention you give a cat, the more likely they are to return it. Cats are territorial. Being in their home environment greatly affects their attitude. And the common wisdom that cats are aloof is provably false. I want you to hold on to that phrase, provably false, because I don't think that's a scientific claim. So the article starts off with some anecdotal shit about going to the zoo. I'm not entirely sure what the hell they're talking about here. They're just describing a trip to the zoo. Okay. The writer's talking about himself and then brings up the danger of anthropomorphizing other species. We usually get it wrong. Well, I think your title did that, dude. Alright, anyways. Forget wild animals. We misunderstand domesticated breeds all the time. I'm not sure how many times someone has told me that their house cats are aloof, but any cat guardian that takes time to form a relationship with their housemates will quickly laugh that one away. Okay, for example, the picture below is where our three cats spend most of the time during the day while I work on my laptop. Okay. Cute kitties. Cool names for kitties, too. Okay, here we go. We're a few paragraphs in, but we got a link to the study, right? So when you're reading articles on these big websites that are sort of disseminating and writing about science, one thing that I want you to understand is that this is not primary information. It's usually secondary or tertiary information, or it's just some person's original spin on the idea. So right here where they have the words new study, that is a link to the actual primary information, okay? And he kind of explains the method of the study a little bit. And then here he talks about, regardless of whether it was a guardian or a stranger, cats are more social when humans pay attention to them. Okay, and then he has a little quote from the lead author there. Here we go. They're pretty human in that sense. Okay, there's that anthropomorphization you warned us about. But the interesting thing I found was that in the actual scientific study, the familiarity with the person or the bond with the person was irrelevant. Whether the person was a stranger or was their owner, the very act of just giving them attention was what caused the social behavior in the study, or what correlated with the social behavior in the study. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so here he talks about sort of knowing the cat's history. Gives some pretty good advice about what's with cats, I guess. Oh, translation. Be a jerk and you produce jerk cats. That's a choice, not destiny. Okay, well, we already found just by reading your own article that it doesn't matter how much of a jerk you are or aren't to a cat. It's just about whether or not you're paying attention to it. And whether or not the cat's a jerk probably has, an awful lot more factors playing into it than just what this article is going to show us. Okay, so here's the actual research article. Okay, the quality of being sociable, the influence of human attentional state, population, and human familiarity on domestic cat sociability. Okay, thanks. So here's the claims of the article. Relatively little scientific research has been conducted on cat-human social behavior. Cats are facultatively social animals that display flexibility in social behavior. Human familiarity did not influence pet cat sociability behaviors. Clear individual variation in sociability scores was noted. Okay, well, thanks for that. So if you're reading it, if you actually take the effort to get to a primary article on something, the first thing you want to do, being most likely a reader who is not an expert, is you want to take a look at the abstract. Okay, the abstract is going to attempt to give you an understandable synopsis of the study, highlight a little bit of results, and talk about future directions. Okay, so here what we found was that cat population influenced sociability, and shelter cats spent more time in proximity with the inattentive, unfamiliar human as compared to pet cats. Additionally, compared to pet cats, more individuals in the shelter cat group meowed at least once during the unfamiliar human inattentive phase. Human familiarity did not significantly influence pet cat sociability behaviors. Overall, a wide range of sociability scores was seen, indicating individual variation is an important consideration in social cat behavior. Future research in this area will predict conditions under which strong cat-human bonds form and establish a more comprehensive scientific understanding of cat behavior. Okay, so I want you to pay attention to the language of this. I know that's getting kind of boring staring at this right now, but I want you to note that the future directions piece of this makes a suggestion. And there's nothing in here that says cats being jerks is demonstrably or provably false. Chances are if something says provably false, it's just not science. That's not really what science does. What it does is it shows what they believe that their results support. Okay, and I'm guessing that the paper is probably pretty well written. We're going to kind of skim over it a little bit. And then they make a suggestion for future research, okay? And they're just talking about, well, maybe we need to take a look a little deeper at human-cat bonding, which why not? I mean, it's kind of a fun, cute subject. Okay, so the introduction section, this is where you're going to find where the authors did their literature review. So this is where they looked at old research or existing or contemporary research and sort of wove it into a framework to base their experiment on. The methods section is the methods section. It shows what they did. So they had a specific kind of room set up, very specific protocol for petting the cats, and then a difference between an inattentive phase and an attentive phase. So there was limited petting, and then there was sort of like free form petting. And then they had multiple experiments set up on these ideas. So anyways, you can read this on your own time. I'm not going to expect any of you to understand the stats of this. Just know that technically, usually a p of less than 0.05 is considered acceptable or significant or whatever you want to call it. However, there's plenty of reasons why p-values are not reliable figures, but that's not for this video. What I want to do is go to the very end of the article, okay? Because when I talk to people about how to read scientific papers if they're not scientists as the abstract, the discussion and the conclusion, and maybe the future directions. So here what we see is that being in a home or a shelter can influence how sociable a cat is. Notice they say it can influence, not causes, or not proves or disproves. I mean, that's language that scientists just don't use. Let's see here. In respect to cat sociability and factors influencing the cat-human bond, many questions still remain unanswered. Um, Future research will continue to shed light on our scientific understanding of the domestic cat and ways to utilize this knowledge to increase cat welfare and human cat bonding. Okay. Then at the bottom, you have your funding disclosure. Okay. Ethical approval acknowledgments. These are all things that you want to look into when you're looking at research, because sometimes you'll find that the financial influence may be sort of contributing to the bias or lack thereof in the results. So, I mean, I don't see anything wrong with what I'm looking at here. It's actually a fairly well written paper. I spent a little bit of time reading it before I got on here, but I just thought this was a good example of the disconnect between science and consuming. So, anyways, let me switch back to my regular screen. Okay. So sorry if that part was boring, but what I want you to think about with that is what the author of the Big Think article represented as being quote unquote scientific information and what the researchers actually found. So what the researchers actually found was is that however much a cat is paid attention to is how much it interacts socially. All right, it's really not that mind blowing, and it really didn't suggest whether or not being mean to or neglectful to a cat had no suggestions of any of that whatsoever. The entire premise of the article was a huge exaggeration from what the actual research presented, and I find that this happens all the time, not just in sort of these clickbait uh, websites and stuff that just sort of get clicks by misrepresenting information, but I mean even in well published books and stuff where the author has their own agenda and stuff. I mean, they're going to take existing information and they're going to turn it in a certain way to persuade their viewers. I mean, I get that that's just how the game goes, but as a reader or as a consumer, you should be uh, preferably a little more informed about how it's influencing you. And even though you are either going to be persuaded or not, I think the idea is that you should become more conscious of why and how you're being persuaded. I mean, I love cats, but my first look at that article was thinking this is bullshit. When I look at a lot of the science stuff that I see, posted through social media and stuff, my first instinct is to dismiss it. My first instinct is that this is garbage writing and I'm not going to even care about what's in the article. I mean, and obviously I could do that on a lot more controversial or heady topics, but what I'm looking at here is something that's easy to understand, and that is that 90% of the time you're being lied to. Okay, exaggerating is still a lie, and it still makes it hard to get to the bottom of what's really going on. So my suggestions are something that you would learn sort of in a, I don't know, college sophomore research course is how to evaluate sources. Okay, so I'm not going into great detail about this because we're not in college. I just want to arm you with a couple of ideas. The first thing is looking at the source. Is the source credible? Well, on the internet, frankly, no, they're not fucking credible. You have to find your way to the primary source at all times on the internet because basically every website is just trying to get clicks out of you. They don't care even whether you believe it or not. They're not trying to recruit you. I mean, unless they're trying to recruit you for extra clicks in the future, there's really nothing past that. I mean, they may have some idea of what they do or don't believe and have some sort of, vision or mission statement about their website that really, gels deeply with them or whatever. But I mean, it's all the same game. Another thing to look for is, sort of financial interests, okay? And usually you're not going to find that without getting down to the primary source or by doing other research to figure out who's funding it or who's making money from whatever is being said. I mean, if we're looking at website revenue and traffic, if it's just about getting clicks or getting money from a sponsor or product placement, I mean, that's whatever. That's just regular old people grinding to make money. I get it. However, if you find that, an article about the effectiveness of a drug that was solely funded by the manufacturer of said drug, even if it looks like very cut and dried science, it's worth questioning the motive. Okay, and questioning the motive is going to be something I'm going to come back to because we're going to talk about talking to your friends or the larger social community on social media. Um, because we get into a lot of arguments and debates with people on the internet because we all have our pet beliefs. We all have those things that we hold dear or those things that we very strongly believe in, and we believe all of the things that we believe in to be factual in nature. I mean, I think that that's just an inherent bias of the human mind, and it takes probably an awful lot of effort to get over that. One way of sort of mitigating that is to kind of take a minute to look at a source, and maybe I'll do in the future a more detailed video about how to actually go through that whole process. Because there's an awful lot more to it than what I just said. I'm just kind of giving you the 2-click version of how to double check your shit. But okay, so we have discussions, debates, discourse, fights, I don't know, whatever you want to call them on the internet every day, all the time. And there's always people that are just trying to be heard. There's always a person trying to win, and there's always a person trying to, sort of play the nice guy, and then there's the devil's advocate. I mean, there's all sorts of fun little roles that people like to take during those arguments, but I want to bring in a little idea for you to take home when you're having your next fun little internet discussion or heated debate. If you're the person that does that, I know I do sometimes, and I'm not always great at it. But when you're thinking about, having discussions with other people, there's always these fun things that happen. So there's always a guy who's a rules lawyer, or well, not always, but there's always the rules lawyer who's like, well, that's a logical fallacy. You're kind of straying from your point. You're moving the goalpost and blah, 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 blah. I mean, sometimes I'm that rules lawyer, but, and a little bit of that's not terrible, but when that's really just all the discussion becomes about is how people are fucking up the discussion, then it's not really a discussion anymore. And there's always the person that wants evidence but doesn't present any evidence. And then when they present evidence, it's just them typing with no source, no pointing to nothing, nothing for the people consuming the information to go look at. I mean, it's one thing to have or demand evidence, but what's the point if it's not actually being examined or, at least evaluated in some way, shape, or form? A lot of these arguments are more competitive in nature and unproductive, and I'd like to sort of talk a little bit about the difference and how to spot that, okay? We're going to use a couple of really basic ideas about game theory, okay? Game theory actually is a fun $10 buzzword that you're going to hear brought up by intellectuals and pseudo-intellectuals alike, and I don't expect you to understand all of it unless you're a mathematician who works with game theory. I mean, I'm certainly not. But what I'm going to talk about here is the difference between sort of a cooperative game versus a competitive game or a zero-sum game. Okay. So a cooperative game is where, actors in a game are sort of working toward a common conclusion where they can make sort of binding agreements about how to get there, okay? That's a cooperative game. A zero-sum game is one that has a clear winner and a clear loser where one comes at the expense of the other, okay? So I want to go back to the idea of intention. When you're having this sort of long-heated and drawn-out discussion on the internet and you're looking at them and you're like, why is this guy fucking doing all of this? Like, this has been going on for 4 hours. I don't even know why I am responding anymore, but I'm just in it to win it right now. Well, chances are if you're stuck in that particular mindset, then you've wandered into a zero-sum game. And quite frankly, it doesn't matter who's right or wrong. It's just going to be about who arm wrestles the longest and who is the most forceful and who is the loudest. So, like, I don't know if you've ever been to a party where there's just people talking over each other. The conversation doesn't make any sense. It's just a bunch of people fucking making noise and trying to be the loudest one and be the center of attention. That's kind of like what that is. It's just whoever is the most forceful in the conversation is perceived to be, or at least perceives themselves to be, sort of the victor. Well, maybe in some way they are. I mean, there's, the idea of dominance or whatever. I don't know. It's non-productive, I think. But if you're in one of these long heated conversations and you're wondering like what the fuck is going on, and then all of a sudden people start producing new ideas or start tying the sides together to paint a bigger picture, and you have some synthesis going on, then you're probably in a cooperative game. And if you sense that you're in a cooperative game, my recommendation is to pursue it. I mean, that's how things happen. That's how new ideas are formed, is when people who have different ideas sort of cooperate on it to make something new. I mean, what I'm saying might seem a little obvious, but I think it's worth evaluating when you get in these discussions. If you're a discussion forums person, or if you're on, some Facebook page or Reddit or whatever, where you see a lot of what appear to be intellectual conversations happening, what you might actually be looking at is just, sort of a bunch of people who have a generally good IQ and some mastery of language and have learned some chops about debating. They're just trying to win and shut the conversation down. Okay, that's a zero sum scenario, and you can really really look at someone's intentions. Like, why is this person engaging in a zero sum game? Okay, chances are they don't have something to sell. Chances are they're not making any money. Chances are they're not even vested in the scientific community or have any tie to that technology or theory or anything like that. So then it only boils down to a few different possibilities at that point. So why is this person engaging in a zero sum game? First of all, they may have been impressed by someone else doing it and they've just adopted that style. I know way back in my early 20s, I favored that style. We're talking back in the days of dial up. But I eventually kind of grew out of that because I liked the idea of turning over rocks and looking underneath them to see what was there, and people working together to come up with ideas and solutions to things. If you have that zero sum guy though, no matter how much convincing evidence or compelling thoughts or whatever you've posted, this person is just not going to relent. They're not going to meet you in the middle. They're not going to even remotely show that they're capable of developing an original thought or something novel or synthetic out of the conversation. This person literally had an agenda to win, and they're used to playing this like a zero sum game. They're used to there being a clear winner or and a clear loser, even if that distinction only exists in their own mind. Um, their motives are very few and far between. It could be perceived status. This person may have some insecurities about their level of intelligence and can only tolerate being right. They can only tolerate being on top of a conversation, and they're maybe just not quick enough of a thinker to sort of assimilate and develop new thoughts in the midst of something like that. That's one possibility. They may have a little bit of a sadistic streak. There's that loss of inhibition that takes place when two people are behind screens and interacting remotely. It really could be that the person is just so very convinced of what they're thinking that they're an absolutist mentally. I don't know. The simple fact of the matter is that all of those motives, if they're not getting paid and they're not, somehow invested in that community of thought, then it's selfish. It has nothing to do with you whatsoever. It's not that you're not worth cooperating with. It's not that the idea can't be cooperated upon. It's just that the person that you're talking to is not a cooperator. That person is a competitor. Even if they stand to gain nothing, even if they're engaging in an empty competition, all they're trying to do is win. Well, when you're faced with that, your best bet's just to walk away. If you made a few friends in the process and you can take the discussion elsewhere, that's great. If it was a loss, it was a loss. If you lost time, you lost time. There's not much to do about that. When people are throwing sources of information at you during a discussion, it's very important, if you really want to be well informed, especially if you believe that you're in a cooperative playing field, then you want to look at those sources and sort of look at that primary source and look at the intentions of the original source, examine the evidence, that is presented. Demand evidence that is appropriate to the problem. For instance, if I walk into a conversation about, let's say, some occultists having a debate on the validity of, Crowley's system versus traditional Buddhism or Hinduism or yoga or something like that, I'm not going to demand of these people to show me scientific proof of that. Even though there may be some studies generally on yoga or generally on this or that or the other, there's not going to be anything out there that specifically examines that problem. If I were to just be searching around and found something that did kind of sort of support some of their ideas, I might bring that in. But obviously, looking at that through a historical or philosophical or occult lens is what's called for, and that's an entirely different set of information. So when you think back to the types of propaganda that I showed, there was the scientific jargon piece. If you feel like people are demanding or showing or displaying or using scientific jargon specifically for the sake of winning as opposed to contributing, realize that that's a form of propaganda. It's something that they may not even realize that they're doing, and they're probably doing it just as part of their rhetorical strategy for that idea of zero sum winning, winning a debate or whatever. So when you look at the internet and you look at sort of like popular thinkers nowadays, I can think of quite a few like intellectual dark web folks where their videos get sort of repackaged by other YouTube channels, and it's like, oh, so and so owned this libtard. Oh, so and so totally, you put the smack down on X, Y, and Z, and it's like, well, um, that's not even a productive way to think about it. It's not intelligent. I mean, and it makes what little bits of intelligence that did exist in those videos diminish completely. I mean, um, with stuff like that, it's so hard to find your way down to the actual meat of what's being talked about. It's not even really worth investing time into unless you're operating on one of those specific problems and you have a real strong interest in sort of diving to the bottom of it. Anyway, so I hope this conversation made some kind of sense. I kind of jumped around a little bit more, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about this idea of, actually being an informed consumer of information on the internet. And obviously, none of us can be perfect about that. But as you move on, I want you to think about what it is that you believe in and why, and how you take that to these sort of transactional intersections on social media where it's like, well, blah 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 blah, I'm a leftist, I'm a conservative, I'm a blah 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 blah, and it's like, really, for the people in your life that know you probably know that you're not that fucking extreme, and if you are, then good for you for standing up for it. If you're not, then I don't know what to tell you, that what, why you need an online persona to compensate for what you lack in real life, is probably a good discussion for an entirely different video. But in the meantime, the idea that I want you to take home is that a lot of what you see, a lot of what you read, a lot of the videos that you watch are just propaganda. It's just one-sided, skewed information that doesn't examine any kind of evidence or whatever. It's got some bullshit clickbait title with words like actually or literally or cringe. Like, I don't need your title to tell me how to feel or what to do. And usually when I see those titles like that and I see this shitty, poorly thought out, poorly written, garbage fucking article, I dismiss it. And I've already lost respect for the website, the author, whoever the fuck is responsible for wasting the 2 seconds of my life that it took to figure out that it was garbage. Um, Anyways, I guess this video is a bit of a rant, but I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll start bringing you some new episodes next week. Take care.